In the centuries following the Norman Conquest, the mythic imagination of Britain underwent a profound transformation. This was particularly the case in England, where the fate-driven heroism of the Anglo-Saxons was gradually displaced by the enchanted courts, noble quests and chivalric ideals of Arthurian romance. But I can't help but think that we lost something of ourselves in that moment, and it turns out that I'm not alone. Although the tales of King Arthur have long been accepted as Britain's national mythology, their dominance came at the expense of a more distinctly English mythic tradition, one that JRR Tolkien, in his scholarly and literary work, sought in part to recover. The Norman Conquest of 1066 did far more than change England's political leadership. It brought a sweeping cultural realignment. French became the language of the ruling elite, and with it came the values and tastes of the Norman aristocracy. Among the cultural imports to flourish in this new landscape were the romanticised versions of ancient Celtic stories, particularly those surrounding King Arthur. With roots in Welsh and Breton oral traditions, the Arthurian legends were reworked by Latin and French-speaking authors, such as Geoffrey of Monmouth and Chrétien de Troyes. It's interesting to note that the Bretons rode with William in his conquest of England, and Geoffrey himself is thought to have Breton roots and is very much a Norman writer. Chrétien de Troyes and Geoffrey of Monmouth's versions of the Arthur myth, full of knights, enchanted objects, courtly love and Christian allegory, became the dominant form of British myth for generations. The image of a noble Christian king presiding over a chivalrous court provided a politically useful and culturally flattering vision for the rulers, keen to legitimise their dominion, and mythically entrench the rectitude of the Norman yoke. The Saxons, after all, were cast as the villains of the Arthur tale. By contrast, the native mythology of the English, the warrior songs and heroic kenning-rich poems of the Anglo-Saxons, faded into obscurity. Stories like Beowulf, The Wanderer's Song or Widsooth, and the Battle of Maldon conveyed a worldview that was alien to the refined ideals of the Norman court culture. They were stark, fatalistic, and steeped in the grim dignity of exile, loyalty, and death. These stories were preserved, if at all, in monastic libraries, rather than celebrated in the halls of the powerful. The contrast between the two traditions could hardly be greater. Arthurian legend, shaped by continental tastes, is rich in mystical elements, divine quests and romantic entanglements. Its heroes are polished knights, pledged to a code of honour and devotion, often entangled in spiritual or moral trials. Its settings are enchanted forests and splendid castles, populated by fairies, sorcerers and saints. Anglo-Saxon myth, by contrast, is set in mead halls, on storm-lashed coasts, swamps and ships on raging seas, populated not by chivalrous knights, but by hard-edged warriors bound by blood oaths. The moral universe is governed less by divine providence than by weird, a concept of inescapable fate. One which can be linked to the Norse concept of the fate-spinning Norns. Women, where they appear at all, are seldom romanticised. Magic is rare and usually malevolent. The hero's journey leads not to transcendence, but to noble death, the keeping of oaths, and the defence of kinship. It was this older tradition that JRR Tolkien revered. As a philologist and scholar of Old English, Tolkien immersed himself in the literature and language of pre-conquest England. He admired the tone and moral texture of Beowulf, calling it the native epic of the English tongue. Though he appreciated the grandeur of Arthurian romance, he criticised it as too lavish, fantastical, incoherent, and over-civilised. It lacked the linguistic rootedness and tragic depth that Tolkien valued. In his own myth-making, he turned not to Camelot, but to the cultural soil of northern Europe. The elves of the Silmarillion, the fatalism of Numenor and the valour of the Rohirrim, these are expressions of a mythic sensibility shaped by Anglo-Saxon and Norse traditions rather than by Norman French or Celtic romance. Tolkien was acutely aware of what he saw as the absence of a native English mythology. In a 1951 letter to Milton Waldman, he explained the impetus behind his legendarium in no uncertain terms. I was from early days grieved by the poverty of my own beloved country. It had no stories of its own, bound up with its tongue and soil, not of the quality that I sought and found as an ingredient in legends of other lands. There was Greek and Celtic and Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian and Finnish, which greatly affected me, but nothing English, save improvised chapbook stuff. Of course there was and is all the Arthurian world, but powerful as it is imperfectly Christian and too lavish and fantastical, incoherent and, to my taste, over-civilized and not rooted in the soil. That telling phrase, not rooted in the soil, is key here. For Tolkien, true mythology needed to be bound to language, landscape and cultural memory. The Arthurian world, for all its brilliance, lacked the grounding he sought in England's native tongue and ancient past. His early ambition, therefore, was to create a mythology for England, not Britain, and not the Norman and Norman-descended court. While his work eventually transcended any one nation's mythology, the impulse to restore a lost native voice remained central. His stories are filled with echoes of the Old English world, the melancholic beauty of fading glory, the loyalty of warriors to their ring-giver lords, and the solemn courage of those who fight against inevitable loss. In this way, The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion do more than entertain. They offer a mythic restoration of a cultural memory displaced nearly a millennium ago. King Arthur and his knights may still be seen as heroes of British legend, but the stories they eclipsed, those of Anglo-Saxon courage, kinship and tragic dignity, deserve to be remembered. There is a latent sense of Englishness in which they still are. In giving new voice to that forgotten tradition, Tolkien did not merely create a fantasy, he recognised the mythic imagination of England, long overshadowed by the gleam of chivalry and the vivid colours of heraldic pomp. But that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, share and most importantly subscribe, and you can also support the channel on Subscribestar via the link in the description or via YouTube's Super Thanks. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.